So there's been a lot of talk today around the PlayStation 5, and rightfully so, after Sony showed their report for this past fiscal year, and it looks like the PlayStation 5 is off to a massive start to get this generation moving. But there was another piece of information in there that I thought was kind of interesting to talk about here. It has to do with the PlayStation 4, which is like the boring PlayStation now because all the talks about the new shiny PS5. But it does appear, based on the information and the numbers released, that the PS4 is actually Sony's most successful console ever. And that includes the PlayStation 2. Guys, if you enjoyed these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So I want to head over here to pushsquare.com, where they say at least 1.577 billion copies of PS4 titles have been sold to customers since it launched all the way back in late 2013, a stat that beats the previous record, also held by Sony, of 1.537 billion PlayStation 2 games out in the wild. And that is extremely impressive to beat the PS2 already in what's that, about 7.5 years or so now. Remember, the PS2 was around for a while. I think they tracked with that number about 10 or 11 years, and the PlayStation 4, I mean, that could have another 2 years in it for all we know right now, considering Horizon Forbidden West appears to be set for the PS4. We're not even sure about things like God of War, so we'll see how much longer the PlayStation 4 goes on here, because as it goes on, it'll continue selling software, considering they actually managed to shift another 1 million PlayStation 4s in this past quarter, which is very impressive there. But looking at this, that is a massive number, and you really need to get, I guess, some context around it, because software is where, obviously, these hardware manufacturers, these first-party companies, make the bulk of their revenue. The hardware that they create and sell isn't necessarily their big revenue or profit maker, right? The idea is to get you that box at an affordable price so that you continue to put money into their ecosystem, which mostly hinges on you wanting to play video games. And that's where things like revenue around services comes into play. But really, it all comes down to the software and the games that keeps you engaged, as they say, with their hardware. So you want to sell a lot of it. But if we look back on even Sony's, which is where we'll start here, we can see the PlayStation 1 had 962 million pieces of software. The PS2, as we just mentioned, 1.537 billion pieces of software. As we can see, they stopped tracking that in March 31st, 2012, because obviously eventually they have to stop tracking these things. So we at least have a hard cutoff date there. But then you go up to the PSP, 331 million units of software. It was pretty bad. I mean, a lot of people bought the PSP just to hack it, and then they loaded their games up. I mean, it had over 80 million pieces of hardware sold for the PSP. 331 million. I mean, come on, that's pretty bad. But then you see the PS3, just under 1 billion units of software sold there. And I'm curious if it maybe eventually crossed over or crawled over that 1 billion mark, but they stopped tracking that March 31st, 2017. So you take the PS4, had 1.577 billion units of software in about 7.5 years, and it's super impressive by Sony standards. But then you kind of get out of Sony's like bubble there, and it gets even more impressive. Did you know that Nintendo, who obviously does very, very well when it comes to software, has never actually sold 1 billion units of software with a system? In fact, the closest they've ever come was with the DS, where they had 154 million units and 948 million units of software. Yeah, even like their most successful handheld device that was, I mean, taking the world by storm there, couldn't get to 1 billion units of software. And then you see the Wii, which once again took the world by storm at the time, 921 million units of software. In fact, I believe right now that the Switch is going to be Nintendo's first 1 billion unit software seller. I think that has the best chance if you look at it. It's currently at 532 million units, and we're going to get an update for this number in, I think, a week now, actually. A week into May, we'll find out a bit more about how far they've gone with the software from 532 million, maybe 600 million or so. We'll see there, but I think with the Switch still having a good, I think, 3 years at least in it, and the fact that as that install size builds and you release more big-time first-party software, and then the third parties get involved, like what we've seen with Monster Hunter, then things really start to accelerate exponentially. So while this is super impressive for the PlayStation 4, I also want to give the PS2 some credit, because if you really think about this, the PS2 managed to sell over 1.5 billion units of software without an online store. I mean, the PS4 had a store that you go to, hit a few buttons, and technically then you've added to that software count. I don't think Sony counts every single thing for the software. I think there's a cutoff for indie games and all of this, but still, the fact that the PS2 was able to do that from what was essentially all over-the-counter sales is extremely impressive, and unfortunately isn't a metric we'll probably ever be able to measure back up to, considering online purchasing through these consoles, all of them now, is super popular. It's overtaken physical for, I think, all three of them at this point, and that includes the Switch. So the PS2, I think, will still stand the test of time with its over 1.5 billion units of physical software sold, but I mean, the PS4, super impressive for Sony to have that. It is still, I think, the most successful platform for Sony. We'll see how the PS5 stacks up to it after 7 years or so, but all accounts now, with the pace that the PS5 is on with its hardware, might end up matching the PlayStation 4, and then we'll see how things go with software down the road. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below, because while the PS4 doesn't appear like it's going to reach the same install size of the PS2, north of 150 million units of hardware, certainly looks like they're piling up the numbers where it counts with the software. And for me, alongside of things like network revenue that they're bringing in from PlayStation Plus subscribers, looks like the biggest moneymaker for Sony in its history when it comes to the PlayStation brand. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.